Hello, Politics Plus Media 101 listeners. Today's show is on technology. It's Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg, Threads versus Twitter. Should we even be rooting for either of these people or their companies to succeed? And we have a great guest to help us work through all of these issues and more. It is Katie Notopoulos, former senior technology reporter for BuzzFeed News. So as you listen to the show, give us a subscribe and let us know what you think. Katie, you were embroiled in a massive parody scheme here, which I found hilarious. But I was hoping you could kind of explain to us, our audience, the Threads editor-in-chief joke and kind of what happened.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So when Threads launched, when was it? It was July 6th or something, I think. Like many other people, I rushed to sign up that evening or afternoon. I kind of, poked around on it a little bit. And I kind of just was like, I'm going to do a bit here. I'm going to do a joke. And I said, I'm so proud to be the editor-in-chief of Threads. Thank you at Zuck, at Masari, for Adam Masari, who's the head of Instagram. And then I sort of proceeded to do a bunch of posts that were like, I think to people who, my friends or people who knew me or had previously followed me on Twitter, could very easily tell was like a gag, because I was really hyping up how awesome Threads was, like talking about how much I loved celebrities, how I thought the brands were being so funny on Threads, and, doing a lot of like emojis and just really like sort of like saccharine tone. I thought this was pretty clearly satire. I did have a little controversy where someone responded to me because some people did think I was serious. And someone said, what are you going to, are you going to ban the Nazis on this platform? Which is like a legitimate question because these social platforms have in the past had a dubious, a spotted track record with how they approach moderation. And, I think that like I was sort of joking in my mind, like, the way that Elon Musk has sort of very much sort of been like, I'm all about free speech. It's all about we can have civil discussions if we disagree. But meanwhile, people are like, no, but we really don't like the bad stuff. So I made some joke that I was like, well, here at Threads, we welcome everyone. And if you choose to live a Nazi lifestyle, we welcome you too. And so obviously people who believed that this was real were horrified because they thought, oh my God, Threads is actually saying that they welcome Nazis onto their platform. This is horrible. This is, so people got really upset. It is sort of, I think it a little bit spun out of control. Or I should say it spun out of the bubble of people who knew that I was kidding and then into a bubble of people who are like, very earnestly don't want Nazis on a platform, which neither do I, very reasonable position. And people who feel very passionate about that and, have plenty of reason to fear that there might not be a good moderation policy in place. So I eventually decided that I was going to fire myself. So I made a couple of posts saying, I've got a big meeting that wasn't on my calendar this morning with Zuck, like, can't wait to go talk about Threads. And then, a few minutes later I said, oh my God, I've been fired editor-in-chief. I can't believe this. So that sort of ended the bit, but I certainly had a lot of fun doing the bit, because I don't know, I like goofing around. But I feel bad for anyone who saw that and was like, oh my God, I don't feel safe on this platform because it's going to be this toxic morass and And the truth is, I'm pretty sure that Threads policy is almost identical to Instagram. They've basically grafted over everything that's on Instagram. So Nazis are banned on Instagram and they're going to be banned on Threads. So all that sort of similar hate speech and all other kinds of things.
I knew that it spun out of control because I pitched you due to your work at BuzzFeed. And then you also host Twitter Spaces with MSNBC, NBC reporter Ben Collins. So you're very prominent for our audience in your own sector. And I pitched Katie. And she responds with, that I'm not actually the Threads editor-in-chief. I'm like, Katie, what are you talking about? Of course I know that.
I wanted to like make sure because I was like, oh, maybe you want me to talk about Threads because you think I'm the editor in chief.
Were you getting media requests from BBC and Deutsche Welle and Nikkei Asia asking you to speak on behalf of Meta and Threads?
So I was not, but I did get a message from someone who is high up at Meta saying, "Oh my God, do you know how many requests we've gotten from like media people asking, is this true?" Obviously they said no. And I think that the people they knew I was doing a bit. I like to think they think it was funny. It's an interesting thing on Threads. I could tell it was spitting out of control because I started getting messages on like it started seeping into other platforms, which there was a lot of that going on that first day because everyone was kind of like, what's this new place? Like, do I talk about it on, all the chatter on Twitter was about Threads. But I was starting to see it even on like Blue Sky, which is this really small would-be Twitter competitor. One thing that's interesting about Threads is you can repost. They call them reposts. That's the same as retweets, but they don't call them retweets. You can repost, but you cannot see who has reposted your posts or the count, like the number. And you can't see it on other people's either. You can see if someone in your feed, you can see who reposted a post. But what that means is if you have a post that's going viral, you can't really tell how viral it is. So I couldn't really tell how many people were reposting my thing. And I couldn't tell. Usually you can sort of track these things like, oh, well, a really big account reposted it. And that way I can tell that that's how it got into this sphere of people who would normally never see my content or whatever. Like on Twitter, if, I mostly tweet about like tech and internet culture stuff. And then if I ever get retweeted by someone who's like big in politics or something, that's why it's like a nightmare. And it's like, oh, okay, now it's into like a different bubble of people who are going to engage with this in a very different way. But you can't tell that at all in Threads. So I couldn't really like track how it was moving, which is an interesting feature of Threads. And it's very much like by design. I think they're very intentional about not wanting that number count on there.
Katie, you're talking about Blue Sky. A couple of weeks ago, I was on holiday in the UK, and I was getting all these messages from Justin Higgins telling me that Blue Sky was the next big thing. And as soon as I got back to the US, I had to immediately sign up to Blue Sky because I was missing out. And then 2 days after I got back here, all of a sudden there's Threads. And, we're talking about all these competitors, some significant, some insignificant, that are gathering in this market. And it's kind of remarkable because 20 years ago, less than 20 years ago, this whole concept didn't even exist. There was no such thing as Twitter, and the thing that Twitter does wasn't something that anybody really did. And now it's become this big part of our lives. And some people call it microblogging. Others say it's text-based social media. And it kind of brings to the question, what even is this industry? What is this market? And why is it useful and valuable? I mean, Justin and I, we often use Twitter for news updates because you can get them live in a way that you can't from print or television in the same kind of way. And you can hear from such a wide variety of experts. Other people use it so effectively just as a tool for humor. Katie, what do you kind of see is useful about this medium? And I mean, how do you even think about what it really is?
Well, it's funny you say that 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, there were blogs, right? Like in 2003, Blogger had, I think, recently launched, and which some of the people from Blogger eventually became the Twitter people, right? Like I think Ev Williams was from Blogger. So that idea of like, hey, any idiot with an opinion in their mom's basement can start posting text, even anonymously, to the internet about their thoughts on the news of the day. That was very much in existence in 2003. It was just not quite short form. And, obviously not quite as easy. But, like 20 years is a very long time ago. And 10 years ago, Twitter was largely the same in a lot of ways. And it has sort of existed for a long time. I mean, like, it's obviously useful, right? Like, it's for all the reasons you said, it's fun. let's speak about like 2 years ago. It was a great way to get news. That was, for a long time, it was the first thing I opened up in the morning before I opened my email, before I opened a news reader app. I would open Twitter because they used to have this feature, Moments, that was kind of like a curated sort of what are the biggest trending things, and it would give you a little context. And usually they were sort of newsy. I would look at those, what's the biggest story? Did the earth blow up last night while I slept? Did a celebrity die? It was great for that. And obviously it was not ever quite as popular as Facebook or Instagram. And I think kind of for obvious reasons that are sort of revealing themselves again on Threads, which is that not everyone really enjoys posting short bits of text. And maybe not, they don't even enjoy it, but like, I think to many people, the biggest hurdle was always you look at that little blank box and you're like, well, what the hell do I type here? Right? Like 10, 20 years, or 15 years ago when these things launched, the joke was always like, what are you going to do? Like say what you had for lunch. And like, obviously it became more than saying what you had for lunch. But I think to a lot of people that is still, it's like, what do I type? I don't have a thing to say. And that's, I think that's most normal people. That's very much true of my friends who, don't work in news media. Certainly they're not interested in tweeting. They might read Twitter sometimes, but very few of them are interested in posting. So I do think that eventually Threads is going to run into that problem a little bit. But I think that it has a chance of sort of massaging the community in a certain way to encourage it to be slightly lower stakes than Twitter felt, or like more encouraging, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just reminding myself of the first time that I signed up for a Twitter account or used Twitter was I was a senior in college at Tufts, 2013. And instead of going to the Boston Marathon, I decided to study for some reason. I didn't go to class, Katie. I didn't study. Like, this is just random. And of course, it was the Boston Marathon bombing. And like, I found news out on Twitter back when Twitter was like actually a useful working app. And I'm like, what the fuck? Because you'd see tweets like, oh my God, there was an explosion. And it was like people at the marathon. So I like tried to call my friends there, and there was a just mass communication blackout. Obviously, the U.S. government's like, there's a terrorist act going on, so they blacked everything out. Went to the librarian. The librarian actually came over to me, and she's like, come over here. She's like, there was a bombing at the Boston Marathon. Please keep your voice down. We don't want anybody to know to cause panic because we don't know what's going on. I also use Twitter now for politics because that's what John and I basically work in here. And the Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, who I think maybe is the head of Threads, said that they don't really want it to be a politics and news app. Is that, considering the usefulness that we just pointed out, is that possible? Is this just public relations for some reason? What are your views on those statements and reality?
So I think there's a bunch of things. And it's funny you mentioned the Boston Marathon, because I think of that as such a moment of like, it was both when it became so clear that people really were hungry for this real-time updates. Like they want to know up to the minute what is happening in a way that like TV news and newspapers could not provide. Like people were just hungry for that like information. And at the same time, part of that hungry for information thing created one of the biggest sort of like mess ups. I don't know what kind of language you guys use on this podcast.
You can say fuck up.
Yeah. So it was a massive fuck up. Reddit was like, the sort of like Reddit Bureau of Investigation types misidentified who they thought the person was. There was sort of this, crowdsourced internet, trying to find someone. And they found some guy who I can't remember if it was actually like turns out to be like the guy's brother or just a completely separate person. But
I remember that, and I think it was a completely separate person,
yeah, it was like,
different country, different everything, no connection.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that at the time, 2013, BuzzFeed didn't have, it wasn't called BuzzFeed News at the time, it was just BuzzFeed, and we had some news reporters, but we didn't really have a breaking news team at that time. We sort of were focused on like, we have a sports section and a tech section and a politics section. And this was actually sort of the moment that we realized we need a breaking news team and we need like an adult to run it. Like that was the big moment where I think internally at BuzzFeed, they were like, we need to hire like a real person to run a breaking news team. Partly because I'm pretty sure, I want to say, I can't remember all the details. I think that we ran a picture of the wrong guy, which, big mistake. But it was definitely, we were also seeing that people were just, coming to our website hungry for real-time news updates, which was not at the time something that BuzzFeed had been doing at all. We weren't doing breaking news, but it was just people were looking for any information so much. So I think that that's like obviously like any sort of digital news media and even social media has learned a lot from that kind of mistaken moment of like, let's not just listen to what the Redditors think they have sleuthed out. This is maybe potentially problematic. There's a lot of like misinformation that sloshes around when these big events happen. There's sort of the funny example of like anytime there's a flood or a hurricane, there's this viral picture of a shark swimming next to a car that like inevitably someone posts and they're like, oh my God, I just saw this on the streets of Toledo. And it's a sort of, it's become this like famous viral misinformation thing to the point it's just a joke now. But if you're Adam Massari and you're creating a new Twitter clone, and you're like, you know what I don't want? I don't want headaches. And I don't want people yelling at me. And I don't want the advertisers mad. Do you know what you probably don't want to do is get into real-time delivery of news updates like that. Like you don't want to lean into that. Like that is a headache. It's a nightmare. It's going to cause nothing but problems for you if you're the person running the app, right? It's bad business. It's, it stinks. Unfortunately, there's lots of people who actually do want that because people, want real-time delivery of news. So there's a tension there. I mean, so I can sort of understand why they don't want to focus on politics and news. And obviously, like, they're not going to ban it, but there's lots of ways that they can incentivize other types of conversation.
Elon Musk has been trying to shake up the platform, right? He recently promoted the release of what he's been calling the Twitter files, how Twitter decided to censor the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop. Then this weekend tweeting, my pronouns are prosecute Fauci. He's also been tweeting about the left, like saying the woke mind virus is either defeated or nothing else matters.
Katie, I think it wasn't necessarily only the subject of news in general that was maybe alienating some people from Twitter, but it was also the kind of political direction that Twitter was taking. Twitter wasn't even still the kind of broad tent political discussion that we knew it as a few years ago. It seemed like it was starting to tilt into this kind of far right direction with the changes that Elon Musk had made to moderation, to verification, to amplification, lots of cations. And I think that it caused a lot of the more centrist or liberal leaning audiences on Twitter to take a vacation from the app and maybe head over to, Justin shaking his head at that attempted pun there, and head over to the new app at Threads.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that lots of people were just extremely disenchanted with the way that Twitter has been run because they're seeing unpleasant things on their feed and like kind of what you said, like amplification of the wrong kinds of voices. But now it's like anyone who buys the check mark, which seems like it tends to be a certain kind of person who is excited by the Elon Musk vision, which has been very much inviting in these sort of far right and voices that are,
involuntarily celibate, I think is the term.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear.
I mean, yeah, just like all sorts of. I think it's a big tent for assholes. I wouldn't say it's just that.
Yeah, unfortunately, a larger demo than we would hope now that there's an actual serious competitor to Twitter, unlike Blue Sky and Mastodon and Parler and Truth Social and all of the other would-be competitors, is this maybe going to scare Elon Musk into changing his behavior and the way that he's running this platform?
I mean, absolutely, but just it will absolutely scare him into changing the platform, but just not in the ways you would hope it would, I think. Like, will it affect how he runs the platform? Yes, absolutely. But probably in ways that will make it even worse for you to use. I mean, I think that like just yesterday or something, very recently after Threads had launched, they just rolled out the announcement on Twitter that they're finally doing the long promised thing where they will pay verified users for ads, a portion of the ads that are run in the replies to their posts. And what that means is that, since we had mentioned a lot of the paid verified users are not, it's a big tent of umbrellas. Sorry, not assholes. It ends up that they're paying kind of bad people a lot of money, people that you wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, it's probably not good. That platform is paying libs of TikTok $30,000. That might be a turnoff for some people. That is bad news. So like that was a response to the threat of Threads, probably, but it's certainly not making you or me much more excited to be on Twitter.
One of my friends, Andrew Lawrence, works for Media Matters. He's probably vying with you for best shit posters out there on the internet. He's like a political shit poster. But he sent me a link yesterday, and one of the first creators that was approved by Elon Musk for this paid subscription was Andrew Tate. And for our audience, along with a long list of horrible things that Andrew Tate has said and done, he's on trial right now for alleged human trafficking, rape, and all of these bad things. And that's the type of person, Katie, I think that you were alluding to, that Elon Musk is kind of highlighting on this platform.
Right. And like, not everyone who buys a blue check is an Andrew Tate. Like he's an exceptionally bad person. But he does have a huge following and a huge platform. So ergo, he becomes one of the people who gets cut a big check because a lot of people follow him. A lot of people saw the ad impressions, right? And so it's kind of like, do you want to be involved in it's one thing to have him on there. It's another thing to literally be paying him on there. One interesting thing that is funny too about the whole paying the users is they only pay for impressions from other verified users. And what Elon said is that's because otherwise the whole thing could be gamed by bots. So the only way to guarantee that to the advertisers that they're real views is if they're verified views. So it's actually sort of it's like an MLM that you can the only way to make money is from the other blue checks. They're sort of like, it's like a pyramid scheme, to get verified. That whole thing seems like such a bizarre idea. It also just seems like I'm not thinking too hard about it, only because I'm always like, this feels almost irrelevant. Like this seems like one of the last stupid things of a dying platform. Like I'm not leaving Twitter yet. I'm going to stick around. It's still useful to me for now, but like the more people leave, eventually it won't be useful to me anymore. And I can see that happening in the, relative near future. And Threads, Threads is useful so far. I open it up. I see people I like on there. I see links to news stories that are interesting to me. I see jokes that I think are funny. I wish that there's a desktop all those sort of wish list things that people want from the app, like it'll happen, they'll get the, followers only feed or whatever. It'll get better. I don't know what'll happen, but it seems like it's a pretty good replacement, I regret to say.
We're talking a bit about how Elon Musk has sort of trashed his reputation with the way he's been behaving in the running of Twitter and a lot of his public statements. It's kind of interesting that Mark Zuckerberg's reputation is going in the opposite direction, maybe with the launch of Threads and his commitment to engage in physical combat with Elon Musk, today's villain. Just a few years ago, Mark Zuckerberg was perceived in a very different way. He was one of the most reviled figures in America. The lack of effective Facebook moderation was blamed for exacerbating ethnic tensions in Myanmar. There was testimony in U.S. Congress about that. There were so many issues with data protection that made Facebook a real villain in Europe, especially, but also in the U.S. with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. There was even an Oscar-winning movie that was depicting him as a paranoid, narcissistic, again, villain. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the trajectory that Bill Gates took, where in the late 1990s, he was this controversial figure known for anti-competitive practices. He was the most hated man in tech, but he rebuilt his reputation by embracing liberal philanthropy. Some would say virtue signaling about some of his philanthropy. Zuckerberg is maybe going in the same direction by launching this app that's the competitor to Twitter. And all of those who had these political issues with Elon Musk are now looking maybe to Zuckerberg as a political savior. Do you think that he's effectively taken the Bill Gates route and fixed his rep? Or do you think that it won't be too long before people remember everything that we dislike about Zuckerberg?
It's funny. I think Bill Gates is an interesting comparison, but if I remember sort of correctly, he sort of quit his job fairly early on to just focus on philanthropy, which is kind of how he is, was able to rehabilitate the image a little bit. The face turn is certainly interesting with Mark Zuckerberg. And I think that there's a bunch of different things going on. I think that, one is simply like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Like there's literally that, like people are so fed up with Elon Musk and so disgusted by him, and really, really just don't like A, what he's done to the platform, and B, like a lot of the stuff that he's saying and doing on Twitter. Like he is engaging in really awful stuff, a lot of straight up transphobic comments, and like the things he likes, the things he responds to and engages with are like some really yucky stuff. In comparison, Mark Zuckerberg is kind of like normal, which is funny because I feel like he's, for so long had this reputation as being like a weird lizard person. I think that Facebook's reputation as like the most evil company on earth, I think kind of peaked in that 2017 Cambridge Analytica thing. It was sort of the peak of like the so-called techlash when the sort of bloom had come off the rose of the late aughts startups and people started thinking, what if these are actually kind of bad? And it turns out, yes, they are doing a lot of bad things. And Facebook did a lot of bad things. It was, careless with people's data. It was growth at all costs. It did things that were bad. The moderation issues and the fostering genocide in other countries. Those were very real things. And people were also, I think there was a big thing of people were just mad at Facebook about the Trump election, right? Like there was just that. And like, it really like stuck to it for a long time. Weirdly, I think that there was eventually a change sort of in political winds where like partly the sort of Ted Cruz's and the Josh Hawleys of the world that were like all of a sudden the like big tech is censoring conservative speech. That weirdly, actually, I think for a lot of people who, were mad at Facebook for, what they believed in enabling the Trump election, all of a sudden now, so they're hearing Trump being mad at Facebook and, his sort of buddies being mad at, they're like, wait a minute, maybe it's good that Facebook is, like this actually kind of sounded good to people. So weirdly, it was a sort of another like enemy of my enemies, I think. But I think weirdly that did a little bit sort of shift some political alignment in how people felt about it. I think people also like, there just hasn't been as big a scandal in the last few years at Facebook other than at least a US based one. And then I think also just like some other things came along and became the bigger bad guys. Like all of a sudden crypto blew up, and there's these like legitimate fraudsters, like the Sam Bankman-Fried kind of stuff, who are like literally doing fraud. That's like a big scandal. And I think now like AI is really scary and people are worried about it. And somehow Facebook, which has been around for almost 20 years at this point, doesn't seem as scary. Like we kind of know what it is. We know what it can do. We sort of understand it a little bit. So I think weirdly, like people aren't in this exact moment in July 2023, people aren't as mad at Meta as they might have been 4 years ago. It's a weird, like it's a minor shift in the winds, but just enough that I think the Threads app is able to launch. You know, if this had happened a couple years ago, people would be like, fuck this. I'm never downloading another Meta app on my phone, or Facebook at the time, you know, like this is just going to spy on me. I hate Mark Zuckerberg. Like I hate Facebook. And now it's like so many factors have come together all at once to make it so that people are like, yeah, you know what? I'm joining Threads. And you know what? It's a kind of fine experience. And that's all I'm asking for. The bar is so low.
On Friday, President Donald Trump threatened to place tariffs on French wine and other imports in response to the country's new tax on large American tech companies. In an Oval Office interview, President Trump said he might institute tariffs at some point before the G7 summit in August.
France put on a tax on our companies, you know that, and wrong thing to do. They should not have done it.
Katie, it's funny you're talking about that moment when Trump and Ted Cruz and these others were making all this noise about big tech, big tech. And I think a lot of people in the public really believed that they were serious about this, that they were the enemies of big tech, and big tech was left coded, and you know the Republicans were going to go after big tech because the policy at the time was the complete opposite. They were moving heaven and earth to protect these American tech companies. The European Union were looking at ways to tax them, because they recognized these as American companies. They were upset that they were paying so little tax in Ireland and the places in the EU they were headquartered. And they were trying to put in new rules to tax these companies. And the Trump administration said, oh, if you tax the big tech companies, we're going to start a tariff war. We're going to put tariffs on all of your imports. So Americans at home would be paying more for cheese, wine, all of our favorite products from Europe, you know, just to try to protect Facebook from paying taxes. And then when they would come and testify in Congress, the Democrats would be asking questions about those big issues, about tax, about data protection. And the Republicans would just be asking them about their moderation policies.
There were a couple hearings where, to be fair, it actually may have been a Twitter hearing. It might have been Jack Dorsey was sort of in the hot seat at the time. This is maybe like 2019. No, you know what? I think it must have been, I feel like it was like post January 6th. So it was probably like late 2021, where like, you know, Ted Cruz is like holding up a giant cardboard sign that has his tweets printed on it. And he's like, how come my tweet was taken down? Like there's sort of this airing of grievances of really, you know, specific things about, you know, stupid tweets. And I think for me, I think for the content, obviously Ted Cruz's fans and like supporters were like, yes, agree, you know, I'm there with you. But I think for the people who had been so mad at Facebook and Twitter for their perception of it, you know, in the 2016 election, all of a sudden they're like, yes, take down Ted Cruz's tweets. We love that. You know, there definitely was this sort of flip there of public sentiment.
People are just so darn tribal, but
yes. And so it's weird because it's like people are tribal to these values that they, you know, have, and companies are not, right? Like companies are doing whatever's going to make them the dollar at the moment. So like, this is sort of the shifting winds of how the company is navigating this are not necessarily related to those values that the people who are using the products and voting are using, you know.
So we saw explosive growth on Threads. I don't know, first 7 days or so, it over 100 million user signups. You yourself said Twitter's usefulness is dwindling for you. And also we mentioned how basically Threads was overlaid onto the Instagram architecture or something thereof. We also mentioned Truth Social, Parler, Blue Sky, Mastodon, these smaller companies pretty much failing. So the question is, Facebook owns Instagram, they own Facebook, now they own Threads. They are a massive $750 billion valued company that is just way bigger than Twitter. Does size matter, so to speak? Is it only really a big tech company that could take on Twitter, who basically had a monopoly on the microblogging space, and kind of improve on the product and essentially snuff out the Nazis because they're just so big?
I mean, I think this does seem like a case where it turns out that is the case. In theory, it seems like there's no reason why some other competitor couldn't have done it, except that literally, I think it's expensive to run an app that's full of a lot of accounts. Blue Sky seemed like the next best thing because its functionality is very similar to Twitter, and it seems had some other pleasant qualities. But it literally couldn't let people sign up. You know, you sort of had to wait until you got a special invite code from somebody, if you had a friend who was on there. You know, it was restricting how many people could join it because it couldn't, just couldn't handle the bandwidth. Like, you literally need a lot of engineers to run a big site, which is part of the reason that Twitter has had so many problems lately, because Elon fired all the engineers and all of a sudden now the site breaks all the time. Meta has tons of people working on it. And I mean, actually, I think it's a relatively small team, but it's run with the support of a large company that already knows how to run an app with 1 billion people on it. And I assume there's probably some sharing of certain technical resources there. I mean, like, ultimately, people want an app that they can sign up for, is easy to use. I mean, that process is worth a lot. And I mean, the fact that it is already running on a fully functional, content moderation system, whether or not you believe that Instagram's content moderation is fully functional, I mean, it's certainly better than something that was built from scratch, right? Like, they've been doing it for a while. They've had a lot of time to refine it. They have a lot of people working on it. They already had all these controls set up for, how to mute, how to block. You can block keywords, all these things that sort of people have wanted for a long time. Obviously, nothing's perfect. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge leg up to just literally have an app that works.
I saw some commentary speculating that the social media sphere it always was basically winner take all. So Instagram with pictures, TikTok with videos, whatever Facebook is with whatever Facebook is. And now there's speculation that we might be moving into a new era in social media where it's not winner take all and more bifurcated. Do you think we're still in a winner take all environment, and specifically the Threads, Twitter as the backdrop of that?
I mean, I think that theory certainly has merit, right? Like, it certainly is true that winner takes all for, TikTok and Instagram. I mean, Facebook still does have a lot of value for that. I mean, Facebook was a really good, it's really good with groups. I mean, I guess it's not a competitor to Reddit, but certainly it probably hurt Reddit. Certainly hurt Craigslist. I use Facebook Marketplace a lot. I don't know. I mean, can Threads and Twitter coexist and compete? Maybe. I don't know. Is it bad for society that Meta is going to run a monopoly on social media? Yes, absolutely. That only TikTok is a real serious competitor anymore. And Facebook is desperately trying to compete with it with just cloning its exact product, both within Facebook and Instagram, to, not great success. I don't know if you guys use Reels at all, but I feel like it's always I feel like whenever I'm in Instagram and I sort of, if you scroll a little bit on Instagram and then you basically end up in Reels. And then I'll be watching a few and I'm like, oh, why is TikTok so bad right now? And then I realize I'm in Reels. I'm like, oh, it's because I'm in Reels. Like, that's why it's a boring thing that I'm not that interested in. TikTok's really good. It's really good at serving you things you want to see. I don't know. I mean, I think that can Threads and Twitter compete? Maybe. I mean, I think that like, I'm not sure that it needed Threads to kill Twitter. I think Twitter could have done that on its own. So I don't know. I mean, for now, it's a weird moment where like both are able to sort of exist. You know, I'm checking both every day.
It's kind of funny when we go through the market and we look at the competitors. You know, we're against monopolies, but then when we hear about who the other players are, we're thinking, oh no, not them, right? Because we start with Elon Musk, then we go to Mark Zuckerberg. We've talked about all the problems with him. So what's the best hope to have real competition? TikTok, backed by the PRC. It's back to the days of the robber barons or Citizen Kane, where there's no angels at the top of these big companies, are there?
No, I mean, there are. I mean, like, I wouldn't totally discount Reddit and Discord. Those are big vectors for like, I mean, they're sort of the unsung heroes a little bit. I mean, Discord is like massively, but it's owned by Microsoft, right? But, and also it's like, it's sort of unseen, right? Like, it's like the silent social network because it's private essentially. You know, and Reddit weirdly is like a bizarre success story where it has gotten better. It was like, it used to be like a cesspool of like really vile stuff. And now it's actually like, it's kind of a nice place. There's some interesting stuff. I go on there, I look for like gardening stuff and it's like really useful and I enjoy it. So, I mean, like those things kind of exist. Obviously like they're much smaller scale, it's like everyone I know is on Instagram. Only a few people I know actively use Reddit. I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think it's like healthy. But part of the thing that's tough about these social networks is that like you want to be where your friends are, right? Like you want to be with those other people. That's like the value, right? Is like you want to be on whatever is the most popular version of it because that's what's going to bring you the most enjoyable experience. And that's where advertisers are going to want to spend their dollars. So I don't know. Like it is a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in that way.
I just wanted to add that I use Reddit a lot, like every day, and it's because I have a Great Pyrenees. So there's our Great Pyrenees, which is a dog breed. So I can go look at these cute pictures of dogs. And even I did an AMA on our politics, and I was expecting all of this hatred. Although I'm a guy, so probably way less just off the top than if I was a woman, but there was not much hatred directed at me. And that was in part due to the volunteer moderation who, they have like, they are trying to do their best as opposed to just some large company that's maybe dispassionate.
It is. I mean, like, I always kind of get the sense with Reddit, like, to me, it has the vibe of like the people who are still on Reddit and like, it's not like they've been there forever because, some of them are young or whatever, but like, I kind of think that they know that they have a responsibility to keep it clean. It's a little bit of a like, save our camp kind of thing almost. I don't know. I mean, like people obviously don't keep it clean. Like there's still bad stuff. But it is like people are earnest there. I think that it's like an interesting platform in that like, it's the classic thing of like, if people can really be anonymous, they're not by default necessarily assholes. Sometimes it's just like you want to have a stupid username, but you just want to go and like talk about dogs, and that's fine. Like people actually like can build good communities that way. That you get, by segmenting it into like, we all like this same kind of dog and like, or even just like, we want to talk about politics. I think that like people are probably pretty likely to be more civil in our politics than they are on Twitter in a weird way.
I kind of feel like Reddit is almost more like Yahoo Answers or Quora than it is like Twitter. Like I'll Google a question and I know that it's been asked and I can find the answer. Katie, while we're talking about the prospects for all of these different competitors or near competitors surviving, thriving, I mean, it really comes down to the size of the market, right? And the market is mostly run by digital advertising. So I know in a lot of media fields, like I used to work in television, I keep a close eye on the box office. There's a real contraction happening. There's less ad money in TV. There's fewer tickets being sold at the box office. I'm less plugged into how the digital ad space works, but my impression is that there has been something of a contraction there as well. I know that a lot of digital news publications are struggling. We talked a little bit about BuzzFeed News. I mean, how do you kind of see the digital ad market right now? Is it large enough to support the digital economy as it currently is structured, or does there need to be more contraction the way there is in these other media fields?
Well, I think that, I mean, the funny thing is the reason that there's such a contraction of the digital ad market on things like news sites is because all those ad dollars are going to Facebook and Google instead. Because it's a better spend. If you're an advertiser, it's much easier to just dump your money into super targeted Facebook ads or super targeted Google ads than it is running them on, Politico or any news website. There's an interesting dance there, right? Like advertisers are still spending money, but I do think there is, there's macroeconomic factors at play there too, that, when there's certain things happening, ad budgets shrink. But I think a lot of it is that Facebook and Google are just chomping up the ad spend for these digital advertisers.
So then is there any hope for digital news? And
There is. Obviously there's, people are experimenting with different business models, right? Subscription is like the most sort of obvious one that people see a lot of hope for, that people will actually, people spend money on the New York Times, they pay for it. They don't pay for, there's a lot of like sort of mid-level stuff that might be harder to convince people to pay for, but people, pay for Substacks, they pay for other things that are a little bit more niche. So there's sort of this weird thing of like people will pay for niche stuff and then they'll pay for like the New York Times. And it's a little harder to pay for something in the middle. There are different business models. Something like Bloomberg, their business model is they sell giant computers that tell you what the stock market is doing, right? Like that's how they make their money, not advertisers on Bloomberg.com. So there's a lot of, I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic here. It's
well, Punchbowl News, for example, I don't know if you use them, but in our industry, they make money off of hosting events that are co-sponsored by like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. They make money from subscriptions because it's people trying to basically influence the political sphere. So maybe is the future just super segmentation if you're not a big guy?
I think that's a good prediction. The events business is an interesting one too, because for a while it seemed like that was going to be the next big thing in like 2019. It was like events is where it's at. Like, I think like the New Yorker and the Atlantic and New York magazines were running these really big like festivals that like, would get celebrity speakers and people were excited to come and like, oh man, this is going to be everyone's new version. And then like COVID hit. But those they are tricky because, of the events businesses, you have to get a big sponsor, like that there's tricky things there. I want to be like the most optimistic version of this possible for like what, at the end of the day, people like getting news, reading news. There are engaged people out there. It's a tough business at the moment.
Katie, at BuzzFeed News, you probably would have worked with, or if not for, one of the biggest players in this field, Ben Smith, right, who's behind this new startup, Semaphore. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what that experience was like, and if you give a good chance for success for his new outfit? So
I think that, Ben just recently wrote a book called Traffic. I read it. It was great. It's it's funny because it was a weird read for me personally, because, I'm not in the book, but I certainly recognized a big chunk of it. That was the time that, BuzzFeed was sort of growing. And it also happened to come out the week after it was announced that BuzzFeed News would be shutting down. So it was like this real sort of mind fuck a little bit, partly because this sort of big thesis of it is that like there was this 10-year period, the sort of social media age for news where, we were able to, every digital outlet was able to sort of harness the power of social to, make these big numbers and get lots of clicks and, and make money that way. And then Facebook essentially said, actually, we would prefer not to be in the news business anymore because everyone yells at us and it's annoying. And all of a sudden they turned the spigot off and it sort of crashed, and it was clear it wasn't coming back, and that that's kind of just over. Facebook traffic will never come back. Twitter traffic never really existed. It wasn't a huge traffic driver. SEO maybe will still continue to be a thing. But I think that Ben certainly believes that the future is niche subscriptions. That's what Semaphore is. It's, for niche, passionately engaged people who want the hot news in their inbox and are willing to pay for it.
Katie, any final thoughts on this fascinating dynamic industry that we've been discussing?
I think just one funny thing about Threads and the experience that people have been having on it is that as I've used it more, my feed has changed. It's sort of almost TikTok-esque. It's adapted to being a little bit better of a for you. But initially on that first day, it was very celebrity heavy. And it's interesting because celebrities had fled Twitter years ago. They did not want to be there. They only saw it as a way to get accidentally canceled. And it had very little value for promoting their projects. They were smart. They got off there. And all of a sudden now seeing celebrities do text, movie actresses and people who are not normally doing text-based posts, doing that was certainly funny to see. I mean, it was weird. I don't know how long the celebrities will stick around.
Actors will have to stop posting promotional stuff now because of the SAG strike.
Yeah, that's true. You know what? Maybe they're going to start really threading a lot because they'll be so bored because they can't work, right? So they won't post the promotional stuff. Instead, they're just going to be like, hey, what's everyone doing today? They'll actually just genuinely post because they're not going to be working. That should be fun.
As long as they're not also WGA members, because then they can't write anything. So,
oh, no. So I think the WGA people have been writing up a storm on social media. That's fine. They just can't write for the studios or whatever. So maybe this actually is that's an extra perfect moment for Threads to be launching, is when professional Hollywood people are all out of work and desperate to just put stuff out there. They've got time on their hands.
And there might be a government shutdown in the fall because of the Republicans. So then you'll have all of these other writers that are ready to jump in.
The furloughed workers.
Yeah, and all the politicians will just, have all this time on their hands.
The National Park Rangers.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me.